Hello everyone and welcome back to JB's Total Gaming for the second episode in Should I Try Miniatures game, and today I'm bringing you Bushido. Now you may have expected me to do Armada because we just said X-Wing. Don't worry, we'll get to Armada. But I'm actually super excited to bring this game to you, and the reason I decided to do this next, well, X-Wing is a super simple game anyone can get into, which is why I wanted to do it first. This is kind of a mid-level skirmish game. Now what the term skirmish game means, you're going to have smaller army sizes, so it's a little bit easier to afford to get into, and the playtime is going to be a little bit shorter, which is really going to be most of the games I'm probably going to cover here, depending on if, there's a lot of interest for some other things. Now, the thing about Bushido is I really like some of the mechanisms in this game, and that's why I'm covering it, and also because it doesn't get a lot of coverage. Recently, Shut Up and Sit Down did a written review on it, which I think will help its kind of viewership, but it's been out since 2011, and, there isn't a huge player base for it. It may be difficult to find the miniatures. They might not be on every gaming site you might expect them to be on, and Bushido's kind of hard to search for, but as far as finding the right thing, so be sure you're getting the right thing if you're looking at miniatures for this, and a nice way to make sure of that is here. Right now we are on GCT Studios website. We're going to show off some of the miniatures and some of the cards in that, so you guys get an idea of what this stuff looks like and how it plays. Now, I pointed out that this game doesn't have the biggest player base. It's a little bit trickier to find some of the models. You can definitely find them on certain sites, like this site, obviously. But one thing about this game is it doesn't have a starter set. I believe every other game I'm planning on covering has a starter set where you can get one of each faction and a rulebook, sometimes the full rulebook, sometimes a basic rulebook, and maybe some terrain in some cases not. But basically a way to get two players started at playing the game. This game does not have that. Usually the starter sets are at a reduced price too to help garner influence. They do have starter sets though, so let's look at one of the factions. So there are several different factions in the game and they have different themes. The game is set on a mythical island off of Japan, and it features like samurai and ninja warriors. It features like monks and people work in the fields, and there are also some mythical races. So when we look at this starter set, basically the starter sets for this game are one faction starter sets, which pretty much every other game, especially skirmish level games, has. This game just doesn't have like a box set for enough of two players to start. But you can pick up two of these sets, and the rules are available online, I believe, so you don't have to get the rulebook if you don't want to. But obviously if you want the nice pictures and the nicer book, obviously you can pick that up if you don't want to print it out or anything like that. So let's look at a starter set faction here. So let's actually go to the whole picture here. So here you can see this is the models you get with it, give you an idea of what the models look like. We have this monk sort of guy on the turtle, we have some fighters, and we have some people who would normally work in the field that you're going to assume are probably a bit lower level warriors, and that's the way it's going to work. So we're going to scroll through real quick to give you an idea. So each one of the characters comes with a card. This is actually the front and the back of the card next to each other here. So on the front we can see the stats this unit is going to work with. They have 4 attack dice in melee, 3 in range. Not every unit is going to have both of those options. In fact, a lot of them won't. A movement here. And then this is their key generation and maximum key. So this game, key is almost like mana, or however you want to look at it. It's in this, of course, life force, where this character at the start of every round is going to gain 2 key. The most they can be holding at the end of a round is 8, so they would lose any excess at that point. So these are used a lot of times for key feats. So we have here this character's feats, some basics. I believe these symbols are cost 2 key. And if you don't remember what the feats actually do, they're explained on the back side of the card. So here is the text detail of what these feats do. So these are a really cool mechanism. Not every unit generates key. Some units generate a lot of it. So one interesting thing here is how much health they have. And, they're going to have different things, like this unit has range defense and things like that. We're not going to get into all of it. Just want to give you a basic idea of what's on the card and talk about this key generation, because it is a really interesting thing. I believe any unit can spend like 3 key to add a dice to a roll-off, and we'll get to how attack and defense works. But a lot of the times you're going to, and sometimes it's very important to do, but a lot of times you're going to want to be spending it on these cool abilities characters can do. Now, the basically, when you're building an army, the points you're adding up are referred to as rice. This is still a barter system. There was no money. So rice is kind of the unit that's used to measure how big your army is, well, your skirmish group, so it's not really an army. And there are upgrade cards and things like that that you can add to add more of that, and you can see this unit costs 9. So if we scroll through here and look at some other units, these units are the 2 rice farmers we also saw in the set. Now, they were 2 different models, but they function the same way, so they're both on the same card, but you can see here A and B, the 2 different life tracks for these characters. Now, they have much less of a cost. They cost 3 each, so each one of these units cost a third of what the first unit we looked at is. And, well, they're obviously less powerful. They have 2 dice in melee, 0 in ranged, a 4 speed, and they generate 1 key per turn and have a maximum of 6. So you can see they have these traits, Cowardly, Bodyguard, and they have a feat here and also a unique effect. So again, we're not going to go into all of this, but we can see how these units work. And we're going to talk a bit about the economy of the game and the economy of actions when we talk about how the game is played. And this is some really interesting stuff because there's an economy of key and also this economy of actions, which is a big deal. And these units that are less powerful can be used to tie up bigger, more powerful units, but we'll get into that. So we just talked about a unit that had a lot lower value at 3. This is the leader of this clan here, and he has a value of 11. You can see he generates 3 key per turn and can have a maximum of 10. So so 3 dice in melee is pretty good. Not as good of a fighter as the first character we looked at. They have all kinds of traits here and several interesting feats and a unique effect. Basically, when this character does certain actions, including key focus, which is basically generating their key again during the round, this character can still move 3 inches. Because if we go back to the main thing here with the picture of everyone, you can see this character is riding on a turtle. So basically, while this character is doing certain things, the turtle can also be moving them along. So that's kind of an idea of not all the models in the set, but some of them. And if we go back to the factions, I just want to show off that there is some other stuff, like for example, and if we look at these guys, we can see that they have more of these like bird race characters and things like that. So there are a bunch of different factions with a bunch of different sort of themes for what they do. Mythical creatures are definitely a part of this, while humans certainly are a part of this as well. So there you go. We took a look at the quality and price of some of the miniatures, and if you look at a faction as a whole, there are cards and things you can get with special abilities. Again, you can look these up online, but if you want cards for them, then you'll have them, and the point value and stuff on the cards. A bunch of individual models. There are some factions have like booster sets that are like another starter set that adds more things to it. And there are dice for the faction you can get. And you notice the dice are always going to be 2 different colors, and we'll get into why that's important. And some special different cards and things like that. So you have an idea for the pricing and all that. And you know what? While we're at it, why don't we real quick look at the rules. So if you want to get a rule book, you can certainly do that. £25 in this case, ordering it off the website. And they do have some custom scenery as well, and tokens and things like that you can get. So just want to point out what's available if you're interested in Bushido. But now let's take a quick look at how the game actually plays and why I find this game so interesting. Alright, so now let's talk about the basics of how the game plays and why I think this game is so interesting. So for this example, I'm not actually using Bushido units. I realized that if I only showed off games that I had miniatures to show off to you, that would limit the games that I can cover, but I am only covering games that I feel like I know well enough that I can present to you. But, funding is a thing, and I can only accumulate so many miniatures games at a time. These are actually units from Dust Tactics or Dust Warfare, depending on the type of game you're playing, which is something that we will cover down the road. Now, what's interesting about this game, one of the things, is that there is an I go, you go, in that I activate one unit, you activate one unit. If at the end you have more units, you get to activate the rest of them. However, you don't necessarily use that unit's full activation. So like in a lot of games, you have things that are basically short and long actions. So for example, if I just wanted to move this unit forward its regular movement ability, that would be considered like a short action, and this unit would become tired. Now the thing is, if I don't use my full thing, if I don't do a complex action, actually there's so many games that name them different things, I can't remember what name this game uses for the short and long or simple or complex or whatever it is. Normally in a game, I would then do a second simple action or short action, whatever the name would be in a game, and then my unit would finish its activation. This game is different. If I do a short or simple action, then this unit becomes tired, but if it comes back to my turn, I can then activate this unit again or activate a different unit, and then if I did a second kind of simple action with this unit, they then would be exhausted and I wouldn't be able to activate them anymore. So there is more back and forth in this, because as long as you're not doing a complex or long action that's taking up that unit's entire activation, you're really jumping back and forth a lot. Now this is pretty interesting, because let's say in this case this unit wants to get over this direction and they were too far away maybe to make a charge action at this unit, so they just go forward. Now this unit, in this case, let's say this is a more powerful unit and this is a low value unit, say a 3 rice value unit. Maybe they're able now to do a charge action and come in. Now this unit's going to automatically face this other unit, and a battle will ensue. Now in this case, let's say this is a powerful unit that has 4 melee dice and this unit has 2. Now here's what's interesting about this. By charging in and attacking, this weaker unit is forcing this action to engage in a combat. And if this unit was already exhausted, that's fine, it could still participate in the combat. But because it was only tired, not exhausted, it's basically using its second half of its activation to fight in this combat. So if this is a really weak unit, this unit's activation is less important than this one. So if I can eat up this bigger unit's activation by using this smaller one, then that may be of value to me. And if I can survive the attack, then that's really great, because this bigger unit may be able to one-shot the smaller unit. So let's talk about how attack and defense work. So you saw each faction has 2 different colored dice they can use. So let's say this unit has, like we said, 4 dice they can use in combat. Each player would actually secretly decide how many dice they want to put in attack and how many dice they want to put in defense. And that's a really big thing. So let's talk about how this works. And then both players would reveal simultaneously. So in this case, let's say the bigger unit went with 3 attack and 1 defense. We'll call it the green attack and the black defense. And just for an example, we'll say the gray unit went with 2 attack. That'd probably be a very dumb thing to do in this situation, but we'll get into how that works. So they would roll their attack dice. So in this case, they rolled a 3 and a 2. You might say, well, they got a 5, right? No, the way this game works is you take your highest die, in this case a 3, and then anything that's not a 1 will add to it. So we have a total of 4, because we have a 3 and then plus 1 for this die that's not a 1. Let's say, however, we had rolled a 6 with our highest die. Great. Now, if I'd rolled a 2 again, that would give me 1. If I'd rolled a 1, 1s are just gone. They don't do anything. However, if I had rolled another 6, 6s, instead of adding 1, add 2. So I actually would have an attack of 8 here. So I forgot what I rolled initially. I think it was a 4. So let's say that they'd rolled a 4. Again, this unit would, because they're the one making the attack, would attack first. There are things in the game that can change that, but we're not going to play with any of those special things. So the other player chose 1 defense, so they're going to roll that. So they rolled a 5. So a 5 beats a 4, so nothing would happen. The attack would not go through. It was successfully defended. However, let's say, I don't know, they rolled a 2. So in this case, we'd have the attack that beats the defense by 2. And then the player that attacked would roll 2d6, and in this case, you're just going to add these up. So a 3 and a 2 would total 5. And there's a damage chart you'd look at. You'd say they won the combat by 2, go across the 1 line, and then we had a 5 on the attack roll, and where those 2 lines meet, that's how many wounds are going to happen. So if you have an initial attack, where maybe you only defeat the defender by 1 or 2, and you roll pretty poorly, you might do 0 damage, actually. And then if you roll really high, you might do 1 or 2 damage or something like that. However, if you beat the defender by a whole lot, then that's where you're going to do guaranteed damage even on lower rolls, and likely kill most models on higher rolls, as to you're rolling 2d6 and just adding them up. So that's why in most cases leaving at least one die in defense is a pretty good idea, because if your opponent rolls well, even on 2 attack dice, if they roll 2 6s and they get an 8 and then they roll on those 2d12s, in that case even a smaller unit may be able to kill a more powerful unit, particularly if they don't use any defense whatsoever. However, there are going to be times where maybe you don't want to use any defense, because remember that initial attack happens first. So maybe if things were switched around and this unit was attacking and they're certain they can take out this unit on the initial attack, then they won't be able to make that swing back. Now, one thing to bear in mind, if you're using more than 3 dice for a roll, only your 3 highest count. So even if I had rolled 4 6s, I'd get 6 and then +2 and +2, and then that 4th die would not be added to the total. So actually, it might be a better idea for this person to use defense, because here's the deal. Now, this guy's going to swing back. They're going to roll 3 dice. In this case, they got a 6, a 3, and a 2. So that's going to be a total of an 8, and this unit didn't do any defense, and chances are it's going to be killed. So instead, maybe this unit would actually roll 2 defense die. You can do that. You can put all of your dice into defense. The whole point of that being that this unit wants to survive and basically tie up this other unit. So now that this has all happened, this unit is exhausted. Let's say this unit has survived. So let's say I had another opportunity to come in, and this unit was able to come in and attack from behind. Because this unit is already engaged, and facing does matter in this game. You normally have like a 180-degree arc, if I remember correctly. This unit has now been flanked, which is a way you can manipulate the dice in the game. Also, they're exhausted, so they would lose a die. And there are ways to gain dice and lose dice and things like that. And also you can use key to add dice and whatever. So there's, again, an economy of actions. By tying up this unit, making it exhausted, and this unit surviving in particular is really nice, you can get all kinds of bonuses or losses and things like that. So basically I'm getting bonuses for flanking. They're losing dice from being exhausted. So there's the advantage of having smaller units. While, again, if you're not able to get into the situation, the bigger units can often just sweep through the smaller units. So there's an economy of key, deciding when to use it, how to save it up. There are units that can even transfer key to other units and things like that for cool abilities. So there are units that have abilities that maybe that they normally can't generate key, but they still have a key ability because key can be sent to them. And then there are cool things like this, where you're using up your opponent's actions by attacking them, making them exhausted, trying to flank, and doing things like that. So this dice mechanism, where each player secretly decides, you can go for it all and try to kill a unit before they kill you. You can just play totally defensively. And that economy of turns, that economy of actions, where you can potentially take up actions of another player, is something that's really neat and unique about this game. Also, I want to point out, and we'll look at an example game board and things like that, this game is played on a 2x2 area. And this game also has the whole idea of having lots of different objectives that can happen. So unlike X-Wing, you can have objectives where maybe you're trying to garner favor from temples. You can have objectives where maybe you're trying to kill a unit on the opponent's side, but you can mix up how the game plays as well. So this game gets into the action very quickly because you're on a very small space, and there's more variability than X-Wing as far as your objectives, where you're not necessarily always trying to kill your opponent. You're maybe trying to accomplish something else in order to score points. So there you go. There are some reasons why I think Bushido is really cool and something I want to talk about. Here you can see on the screen kind of an example of what a board might look like. It's a pretty small board. Again, what terrain you want to do is up to you. And again, these games can have varying objectives, which I think is really cool. So who should get into this game? Well, I think this game is simple enough that it could be your first miniatures game. It's not the most simple game, and it is more complicated than X-Wing. There are some complicated abilities and interactions that can happen. However, the basics of this game are pretty simple. You have, your actions that you can do. You go back and forth. You decide what dice you want to roll and things like that. So I think while this game has a bunch of nuances that can be difficult to master, I think the basics of it are still relatively easy to learn. So if you're new to miniatures and this theme or these interesting mechanisms sounds interesting to you, then Bushido may be a really good choice. Now, bear in mind that that, again, you don't have that base starter set. So maybe if you can find another person who also is interested in this and you both buy a base starter set and try it out and then decide what models you want to add, that's great if you wanted to buy more, but you don't have that learn to play set in the game, which I do think is kind of a disadvantage for a new player. Also, like I said, if you go on Amazon, things like that, you're not necessarily going to see this game, or you may have difficulty searching for it with some other Bushido stuff. It is certainly available, but for example, some of the normal board gaming sites that I buy stuff from don't actually carry this. Some sites do. While it's trickier to find, you can definitely find it. And overall, I think the models are pretty solid quality. Now, this is a game where the models, it depends on the set. I've seen models for this that are pretty much together or only have one or two things, and then there are models that you put together. But this is a set that does allow you to do modeling, to put stuff together and to do your own painting. So if that's something you're not interested in, that may be a turnoff. And if you are interested in that, then there you go. This game definitely has that available to you. Now, what I do like about this a lot, though, is the portability of it. You can play in a very small space. So let's say you don't have a gaming store to go play at. You can, if you have a table anywhere, it's probably at least 2x2. So you have the ease of setup and play, and, overall a fairly simple game that does have some complex interactions when you really get into it. So this game doesn't have a huge player base. That's one of the reasons I'm covering it. You don't see a ton of coverage for this game. I think that Shut Up and Sit Down review will help. But overall, this game, you're probably going to have to convince someone else to play this game. You may have trouble finding a player base in your area. Now, you may have one. That's great if you do, but it's definitely one of the lesser known games that I'm planning on covering. So that's something else to bear in mind as a starting out player. Now, what are the disadvantages of this game? Well, some people don't really like the damage chart. That feels a little archaic, but overall, I would have difficulty pointing out reasons why a new player shouldn't check this out, other than the things I've already mentioned. It doesn't have the starter set and things like that. I feel like that's really the main disadvantage. Now, the advantages, I think, are this game has those really interesting mechanisms. I really like choosing which dice you're going to go. Are you going to risk and really go for it? Are you going to play totally defensively? Are you going to play balanced? In general, like I said, I think it's a good idea to keep one in defense, even if you think you might kill your opponent, but sometimes, you just might want to go for it. And especially that thing of taking away opponents' actions by engaging them. There is, like I said, some dice manipulation that you can do based on facing and exhaustion and all of that to add or subtract dice. And there are some really cool key abilities, and as you play a faction longer, you'll kind of learn how they're meant to function. Okay, this guy's maybe like a key battery in order to send key out to other players, or however it's going to work. I mean, straight up, this guy hits hard. That's pretty simple, but there are interesting nuances in how the factions play. There are units that can summon other things. There's even terrain things that you can summon and send these summoned units out. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff in the game, and I really like how unique this game is. It also has, in my opinion, a pretty interesting theme with this kind of semi-realistic feudal Japan with also these fantasy races and things like that, and the factions are pretty different from each other if that's something that interests you. So overall, this game may be a little bit higher barrier of entry, especially if you want to buy the book and you want to buy two factions. That's going to be a higher startup cost than some of the other games we're going to talk about. However, unlike X-Wing, in if you buy two or even one for yourself, starter packs, you're going to have enough units to do a real battle with. You're not starting with one X-Wing or two TIE fighters or something like that. So they are kind of faction starter packs, much like any other of these games is likely to have, for around the same price. So I don't think the pricing's bad. Just bear that in mind. You don't have the base starter set. If this was helpful to you, leave a like. If you want to see me talk about some different things in games or whatever, if the other things you want me to cover, let me know. Leave a thumbs down. But this is a series that I'm really excited about, because I think now that I'm getting into miniatures gaming, it can be difficult to decide which game you want to get into, and that's what I'm here to help you with, what the new player experience is like, what makes a game unique, and why it may be interesting or not interesting to you. So again, between the what I think is a cool theme and the really, I think, unique and interesting mechanisms, this is a game that I personally can pretty highly recommend if you feel like you want to make that investment, and if you think you can find the player base to play this game with. And if you don't, then maybe there's some other things that we'll talk about that are more popular, or if you're not interested in putting together models and painting them. We've already talked about X-Wing, but there are some other games we'll talk about that as well. So thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and we'll talk to you again soon.